listen.
Never in my life associated the word boring with baseball.
We know what's up.
Me? Yeah. Famous? Yeah.
And I'm like giddy over there smiling like, we're about to win this shit.
Did everyone give you crap? Give me a good host story.
I'm not picking it up.
We both love the game.
We talk about it every day.
Getting on baseball.
Having some popcorn, you're fooling around your phone.
I'd have to wait in line for 3 hours.
Hang on, because it's about to be a wild ride.
And welcome to another edition of West Coast Bias here on the Baseball Isn't Boring Network. Now, I know I just said this is an episode of West Coast Bias. So it's kind of ironic that we're going to be visiting someone that's on the East Coast, the other coast. I don't know which one is the left coast or the right coast because I'm ambidextrous and it all throws me off. Doesn't make sense. Stage right, stage left. That's how I operate. But we're joined by the incomparable contributor to all sorts of things Mets, SNY, all the publications out that way, Laura Albanese. Laura, how are you?
I'm doing well. I'm reporting from the best coast, which is not the West Coast. It is I can't even say that with a straight face. It is so cold on the East Coast right now.
I've seen the reporting. I've seen the friends in New York that posted the snow. I'll have you know, here out this way, no snow. It's great. It's sick. I'm not even going to sit here and complain.
I am the minority that likes snow, but living in an apartment building, I also don't need to shovel snow. So I feel like that is the biggest factor. Like, no, I'm not going to have a heart attack trying to clear my walkway, and maybe that's what brings my appreciation out.
Hey, it's the little things, right? It's the little things. Out your way. It's been a very interesting time, and I'm sure people listening to this are like, "Oh, we should be talking about the Dodgers." Here's the thing: we're gonna have plenty of time to talk about the Dodgers. The Mets situation to me is one of the most intriguing things of the offseason because normally by this time you're planning some stuff. Maybe some holiday things, getting together with the fam bam, and it doesn't seem like your work is going to be slowing down anytime soon. So let's just get right into the thick of it. The Brandon Nimmo thing, completely out of nowhere. Edwin Diaz, I'll be honest, out of nowhere. I did not think the Dodgers were going to sign Edwin Diaz. I did not think that's where he was going to land. The Nimmo trade, completely out of nowhere. Was it the same for kind of what your reporting was and what your sources were kind of telling you, or is there something that we missed completely?
Yes and no. Like, the writing was a little bit on the wall. You started hearing murmurings, probably a few weeks ago. So when it happened, I was not actually shocked, but a lot of people were, and understandably so. So I think there were a few things going on. First of all, Nimmo's getting to the age where he's probably going to be in decline, and that contract is a pretty heavy onus on the Mets right now. That being said, I mean, you're talking about the longest tenured Met. There has not been a lot of stability in this franchise with regards to personnel. He's also extremely well liked, both within the media. You honestly can't find a nicer guy, genuinely, and among a lot of his teammates, and especially with the fans. So to see him being traded off and kind of just leaving a question mark in the outfield for Marcus Semien, who absolutely a defensively just elite second baseman, but also one who struggled a lot at the plate last year. So while David Stearns has mentioned time and time again, run prevention, you also have what seems like your 432nd second baseman on this roster, and you are getting rid of your outfielder, and now you have more questions. So this is kind of an interesting thing because that's when you kind of saw it was a little bit of the canary in the coal mine. David Stearns is betting on himself. Because right now, all the moves that he's making, they're primed to make him persona non grata over in Flushing. Not offering Pete Alonso a contract, maybe not communicating with Edwin Diaz, getting rid of Brandon Nimmo. If you can't flip all these moves into a contender, a true contender who makes the playoffs, and at the very least makes a deep run into the playoffs, then people are going to be like, well, it was all for naught. Because we're giving you the keys to the kingdom right now. You can do whatever you want. You said in your postmortem that you were looking at the idea of blowing up the core. And I don't think people expected him to blow up the core to this level. So now that he's done that, you have to fill in the pieces. The question is, how does he do that? Because you look at some of the free agent options, and yeah, there are some tantalizing pieces there, but it's also, do you give this gigantic contract to Kyle Tucker or Cody Bellinger or whatever? Do you overpay in the situation? Do you trade the farm? And now it's up to David Stearns to essentially be like, okay, So I had all this trust. You guys gave me all this trust after 2024. After 2025, that trust is basically gone. But now I'm going to have to ask you to trust me again. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this pans out.
And it's interesting because in a city in that area, right? Like the kind of the vitriol had been directed at Brian Cashman the last few years, right? And now that dude might be having like the best offseason he's had in a minute because you're not hearing the rumblings of Aaron Boone. You're not hearing the rumblings of like move on from Cashman. Even the Steinbrenner thing, you don't really hear that, right? Now it's the Steve Cohen regime, David Stearns, these folks that kind of were the guys that were supposed to kind of save the vibe, right? They give Juan Soto this giant contract. They're kind of getting, starting to make moves in the right direction, the whole thing, and then bam. And then today, by his own mouth, Edwin Diaz comes out and he basically says, hey, listen, we took an offer to the Mets and they have, and we have a gap to negotiate on this. And then we took it to the Dodgers and they accepted it right away. And given that they accepted it right away, I couldn't go back to the Mets and tell them this is what the Dodgers are offering me. And the Dodgers said, yes, I decided to sign with them. I thought that was interesting because all kind of the reason I didn't think the Dodgers were going to make a run at Edwin Diaz was I thought he wanted to stay there. I thought he was going to stay there. And then you really look at, they go out and they sign Devin Williams. There's some rumblings that may have been kind of the catalyst to what the rockiness of the relationship went. And I'd be remiss if I didn't give credit to someone. So Jorge Castillo, who covers the Yankees, ironically, had posted something about Edwin Diaz. And then a gentleman by the name of Master Flip _ at the end on the Twitter posted of Edwin Diaz saying what I just said on a clip. These are words from his mouth in Spanish, but I can understand it. Not a lot, not everyone can, but there is a translation there. It's his words. So all that kind of combined there with the Edwin Diaz thing. What's happening? Like what the hell just happened kind of between Edwin Diaz and the front office that it kind of got to the point where he didn't even want to go back to the Mets to give him the opportunity to kind of counter that?
All right, so I mean, I don't have anything solid because I'm not in Edwin Diaz's brain and I'm not in those back rooms, but I do have my hypotheses and I do have, things that I've heard. I staunchly believe that Edwin Diaz wanted to return to the Mets. I genuinely think he liked it there. I think he had a lot of friends there. He was well liked there. They were good to his family. There are so many reasons for wanting to go back to the Mets. The Mets bring this deal. It's $66 million, a few minor deferrals. Goes back, Dodgers offer him 69. That is not enough money to uproot your family, to be like, absolutely not. If you want to stay for the Mets for $3 million, you stay with the Mets for like, and you say whatever. It's to us, it's like, oh my gosh, $3 million, but it's $3 million, an entire lifestyle change. You have to uproot everything and move it to a completely different coast. You have to change your kids' schools. You have to do so many different things. So I do think maybe, like when the coaching staff, some of them were fired, some of them, decided to leave. A lot of them were very clear that like we saw the writing on the wall. We at people who they resigned or they decided to go elsewhere. It's like this is not necessarily home for us anymore. And so you have to wonder with a guy like Edwin Diaz, when you hear Brandon Nimmo say, I was taken aback by the trade. And you're like, well, that's not great. And maybe you're Edwin Diaz and you're friends with Pete Alonso. And he's like, I don't see things going well. You understand the change is coming. And then you get the Devin Williams signing, which I think is a fantastic signing. But if you're Edwin Diaz, and from what we're told, there was not a whole lot of communication about that to Edwin Diaz. If you see Devin Williams getting signed, maybe in your head you're like, they don't want me. So the question becomes, what is the level of communication? And I have written about this. What is the level of communication between the front office and its players? Because all these guys are kind of saying the same thing in different ways, which is essentially we didn't feel wanted. So if you're a baseball player and you're going into a place where you don't think that they need you, they want you, even when they do, because the Mets absolutely wanted Edwin Diaz back, but apparently they did not have that level of communication where he gave the team that he's been with for years, he did not even give them the opportunity to give a counteroffer, which means he left money on the table most likely. That's indicative of, I kind of just don't want to be there, and or the biggest Edwin Diaz thing, he wants to win a ring, and it is possible he no longer believed in the vision of the Mets building a sustainable winner or a winner in the short term.
I don't think you're far off on the latter. I mean, obviously, listen, this dude is one of the best relievers in all of baseball. Like let's not understate kind of where the value is, because candidly, I honestly thought he was going to be in the range of Tanner Scott money, and he's worthy of that, given what he's done as of late. And I mean, and he's no schmuck either. He's only 31, right? So it's one of those where he still has some years in that tank, right? And like you said, well-liked guy, not just by the Mets, kind of across the league. You've heard Kike Hernandez talking about the conversations they had about the Dodgers, and to your point, it's a lifestyle conversation. They're talking about, hey man, what's it like in LA? What's it like for your family? Like, because Kike is a father as well, married dude, whole thing, and so all those things you have to take into account. And listen, $3 million going from New York to California, it's kind of a push. Like really, when they're making that sort of money, it's a push. It's like you say, there's other factors you have to take into account.
It doesn't pass the test.
No.
Yeah, it doesn't pass a sniff test, right? If you're like, you do it in like normal people money, and you're just like, okay, the difference between making $100,000 a year and $110,000 a year, but you have to uproot your entire family and your entire livelihood. Suddenly you're like, that's not so easy of a choice. Maybe I can just ask my old boss for a raise.
Yeah.
Like it's different.
But for me, the thing that really stood out to me is before we heard what we heard from Edwin Diaz, we're talking $3 to $4 million here as to a hill that some would take that you died on, right? And then come to find out today, they didn't even really fight for him, right? And like you said, if they're not really communicating with me, and if they're not really fighting for me, then do they want me? And that goes into kind of the Pete Alonso thing. Listen, I'll be honest with you, and this is no disrespect to my fellow Tocayo, because we have the same last name, first name. You weren't getting 7 years, my guy. I'm sorry. You're not getting 7 years.
Oh.
Was he going to have a market? Absolutely. Like you want, that's a dude that you could absolutely plug in top bottom of your lineup offensively. Obviously there's some defensive worries there, but you're not signing that guy for his defensive prowess. You're signing that guy for his bat. And the fact that the Mets, it seems like, didn't really even kind of try, kind of gives you the same vibe of like, do they really want me? Am I looking at it kind of the same way?
Yeah, no, and I think it was really telling. I remember it was game 162. They had just gotten eliminated, and he asked Pete Alonso, "Is he going to opt out?" And immediately he's like, "Yes." Like this was, and obviously everyone knew he was going to, exercise his player option, and not exercise player option. He was going to test free agency again, so that wasn't a surprise. But in the aftermath, the immediate comments were, I love my time being as a Met. I hope they appreciated me as much. When guys say things like that, and you could tell it was coming from the heart. I think there was a wound there from last season where he didn't feel like he was appreciated for what he did for the franchise, and I think he came back partially because he thought they had a chance of winning the World Series, and partially because he wanted to eclipse Darryl Strawberry's home run record. But he just didn't feel like the Mets wanted him. And then the other big takeaway from his press conference, his introductory press conference with the Orioles, was him saying, well, the Orioles gave me the blueprint, and I thought that was so refreshing. So I've covered Pete Alonso for many years. This guy doesn't talk in code. He's a very nice guy. He's, sure, like sometimes his metaphors are a little bit out there, but I appreciate that. I think they're fun. But he meant what he said, and he said what he meant. I didn't feel appreciated. It is my assumption there when we say I hope they appreciate me. And man, is transparency refreshing, which means refreshing means it's not something that you necessarily had a lot of. So no, like in no universe, I think, were the Mets going to offer him the 5 years. I think they probably were capped at 3. But the idea that, you could probably go back, and not to say that he would take a big hometown discount, but to say, hey, 4 for a higher AAV, for a slightly higher AAV, and you get to be a Mets legend. You get to continue this journey. I think that could have moved the needle more than they would have thought. And they just didn't want him that bad. They just didn't think that he gave enough value. And so it goes back to kind of like, Baseball is a business. It's always going to be a business. I'm not against baseball being a business, but I've always said, businesses are made of people. So sure, you didn't want Pete Alonso. That is totally fine. But how you treat these players on the way out, you do have to be careful with that. And I think the Mets do know that because that stuff starts percolating around. It's only free agents. The same way that the Mets had a wonderful reputation last year for being family friendly and everything else. It's something everybody wanted to come to the Mets. The tide is shifting. Do you want a different sort of reputation that maybe makes you less attractive to free agents?
And what's interesting in all of this is I know some people will always say, like with professional athletes, that we can't necessarily relate to them because of the absorbent amount of money they're making. Aside from myself and Jimmy Lipper have to go, punch our cards in, do the thing, right? But in that same respect, we all want the same thing as humans from our employers. We want to be appreciated. And to a certain extent, you want some sort of transparency, especially if you're, let's say, a manager, a director, whatever. You kind of want to know the plan. Like what's the vibe here, right? And to your point, last year we saw they rolled out the red carpet for Juan Soto. Happens. Had a quietly solid year, but it wasn't it didn't necessarily live up to the hype per se. And I think some of that is New York, right? New York is a tough place, whether you're a Yankee, whether you're a Met, whether you're a Ranger, whether you're a Devil, doesn't matter what you are, you have to do something.
A 40-40 player.
Yeah.
Everyone's like, meh.
Meh, right?
40-40.
And so it's one of those where I think that's a part of it, right? And I know people are always going to say too, because there is the Boris thing, because in comparison to Boris to Pete Alonso, they have their kind of weird quirks, right? Where he talks in his weird code and he's being cryptic about this, that, or the other. Pete Alonso doesn't do that. Like he kind of tells you what it is, and love it or hate it, that's what it is. And I don't even think Boris maybe the only part that Boris really had a factor in here is, and where I think maybe he misread the market for his client, is telling him that, yeah, dude, there's going to be multiple 7-year offers. And the likelihood of that is probably not very high. I don't know the offers, but I don't think that he got multiple 7-year deals that were on the table.
No, my thought is that the Orioles probably outbid everybody. By a good bit.
Yeah. And listen, I don't think it's actually a bad match. I actually think it's an intriguing matchup, if I'm totally honest with you, because the Orioles had a lot of expectations going into this last season, and they didn't live up to any of the hype. And that's a great clubhouse guy too. That's where I actually think it's a really good move. Is that club is very young, and you're bringing a dude that's kind of been there, done that a little bit. I think it's a great fit. And honestly, I think getting him out of New York may even be beneficial for him too, because there won't be as much scrutiny. Be that as it may, where do the Mets go from here? Because I don't see an off ramp, if I'm totally honest. And a part of it is, like you were talking about, the persona non grata thing. Public, I mean, the internet absolutely hates Stearns. They're not stoked with Cohen, right? And the fan base was really excited last offseason going into the season, and now it's flat. So where do the Mets kind of go from here?
I'm fascinated to see where it goes, because this is probably, I mean, everyone talks about like last year being David Stearns' like most pivotal offseason. I don't think that's true. Getting Juan Soto was a huge deal, but it was one deal. When I think about something career defining, you got to build this thing from the studs now. It's not just about navigating one deal, which, as thorny as it was, is still one deal. Now you have to like pick from pieces everywhere else. And this is where you show the genius. It is easy to say, let me throw as much money as I can at a generational player who's going to play here for a long time. Hey, I have the money for it. Let me give it to him. That's one thing. Now going to the scrap heap and being like, okay, Jorge Polanco has played exactly one major league game at first base. I bet you he can play there next year, and hoping that it works out. Like Devin Williams, who, again, I love the signing. I think last year was an anomaly. Devin Williams, though, hey, his 2 greatest career failings happened in New York, or around New York. Pete Alonso hitting a home run off of him in the wild card, and that absolutely disastrous year with the Yankees. Let's go back to your house of horrors and see if you can close out games in Flushing, and you have to rely on that. They're saying, Carson Bench can play the outfield, which, yeah, sure, but he's never played a major league game. He started last year in Double-A. You need an outfielder. You need a first baseman. If it's Jorge Polanco, that's fine, but he slots in more as a DH right now, considering, playing first base is hard. I don't care what anyone says. It's difficult. Um, and then you have again your multitude of second basemen. You need a starting rotation, and you need pitchers. You need relief pitchers. I thought for all the world that Tyler Rogers was going to come back, and I thought, hey, that's going to be actually pretty good. You know, you got your Devin Williams, you got Tyler Rogers, AJ Minter is going to be back eventually. Tyler Rogers goes to the Blue Jays because now everybody suddenly wants to go to the Blue Jays because they don't care about like Canadian tax anymore or whatever it was the excuse that they were using. So I think the doors are starting to close a little bit in terms of what's available. And this is where David Stearns shows his mettle. This is where he kind of like proves this is why Steve Cohen, the richest owner in sports, courted me so heavily. The question is whether or not he's going to live up to that.
I think it's interesting that you say that because I think now where the Mets kind of are is I think they have to make trades, right? Like I mean they're like if no disrespect to Cody Bellinger, who I actually think will end up a Dodger.
That would be hilarious.
They would, I would, but I think this is and I'll tell you this, my unsolicited opinion about Cody Bellinger. I think he needed to go to college for a little while, and now he's coming home, and I don't think it's a bad thing, right? He kind of had to get out of where he went to high school and kind of get out of that pool a little bit, go see the world a little bit, and now come back home and kind of be like, this is what we're doing here. I get it. And I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's a fit in more ways than we realize.
But the market for Bellinger, I love Bellinger as a player, is going to be so inflated because everybody wants this guy now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, and I mean, he's no schmuck either, right? Like he's a dude. He's got some stuff in the some hardware in the trophy case, so he's not.
He's great.
Yeah. But yeah, he's going to get paid a lot. And I mean, and he's bet on himself a little bit and good for him. Like I will never fault anyone for getting a bag. And that for me is the root of it all. Right. But the thing I don't really understand, and I'm just so confused by this is, okay, Steve Cohen comes in, wants to kind of be, the not just a player's owner, but a fan's owner. And you signed Devin Williams, and let's just say, like you said, neither of us are in Edwin Diaz's head. But if I'm Diaz, I think of it one of two ways. Rad. Like now I have this dude as kind of like protection, and then I go out and do the thing, or vice versa. Like that's going to win us some games and kind of get us to where we want to be. But if they didn't tell him the vision, I can undersee why he'd be a little upset. But I know some people are going to say that's a prima donna thing. In my opinion, if I'm testing free agency, tell me the plan.
Right. I don't think it is because again, he wants to win a ring. And like people always fault players for being like ring chasers or whatever the heck you want to call it. You're only playing Major League Baseball for a short period of time. Sometimes winning a World Series is the difference between getting into the Hall of Fame or not. It's the difference between like an iconic career and a very, very good career. If you have that great World Series moment. I would never ever fault a player for going where they think they can win. And nor would I fault a player for staying in a certain place because they're loyal to it. I'm not gonna be like Mike Trout. How could you have always stayed on the? No, I'm not gonna do that. But I'm also gonna be like, go get your championship. This is something that stays with you for the rest of your life. And I think people who judge players for one, getting as much money as possible, or two, going to a place where they can win a ring, are not thinking in like practical terms. Going back to your point that these are human beings. You want to reach the pinnacle of your sport. You want to set up your family for success. You only have so much time where you can make money. Go and do it.
No, absolutely. And New York Mets beat writer for Newsday and also SNY contributor Laura Albanese here joining us for a few more minutes. I'm just so perplexed by this because it's kind of like, and it really is a tale of two cities, right? Because you hear, the Dodgers are ruining baseball. They're breaking baseball, all this, that, or the other. And then Steve Cohen came in and he made his presence known, right? He's kind of, I'm not saying this is the parallel, but it's just kind of the comp because of the time it was. It's like when Steve Ballmer bought the Clippers. He came in and everyone knew who he was because he was the weird guy dancing on stage when they announced Microsoft Windows 98 way back when. And, and Steve Cohen kind of, he's letting Met fan know, hey, like, because if you go to New York, right? There's Yankee fans and there's Met fans, and George Steinbrenner back in the day was super vocal about everything himself. Steve Cohen's kind of trying to do the same, but he's got to build something, like you said, from the studs up, in a sense. And now all that kind of like fanfare is like right, like it goes like it's in a vacuum and not in a good way. And so that's the reason why I was asking, kind of like, where do we go from here? Because even at the winter meetings, I don't know David Stearns. I don't know him. I've never interacted with him, but you kind of watch him and you kind of see what he's saying. And it's almost like he's saying a company line, but he's also kind of like being held hostage a little bit, because I don't know if it's like he either, like you said, he's trying to make a name for himself, but I think he kind of miscalculated the way that this fan base would react. And for me, that's where it's like, hey, dude, maybe you should kind of tell everybody what you're thinking, not just in this sense of like telling the players, but kind of give everyone a 30,000-foot overview. Am I looking at it incorrectly or irrationally?
I mean, I think there might be a misperception of how that relationship works. I don't think Stearns wants anyone to know his plan. I don't even think Stearns wants his players or the people who are under him necessarily to know his plan. There is this idea that, Cohen is behind the scenes calling all the shots. I don't know if that's accurate. I think Cohen has made his billions. He runs the Mets very similarly to the way that he runs his company. He puts people he trusts in position to make their decisions, because micromanaging can sometimes harm an organization. And he hired these people for a reason. It's to make those decisions. That being said, you can make those decisions to a certain point, and then Cohen decides, hey, I gave you a shot. I didn't meddle. I let you do whatever you want. Didn't work out. Now this is entirely your fault. So while I think Stearns' job is safe for next season, I think Stearns is calling the shots. I think Steve Cohen believes in his ability to find talent, and he found David Stearns. And he has the leeway to make those decisions. I mean, there have been times, of course, where Steve Cohen has stepped in. But I do think that David Stearns is running the show right now, simply because I think that that's how Cohen does business. So we'll see how it goes. Cohen is a fan, sure, but he's a businessman first and foremost. And when you want to see how people do business, you have to look at the way that they've done business in the past.
Yeah, I don't think Cohen is going into this like being a fan. Like, I think some people think that, right? That, oh, he's a fan and he's like, these are his GI Joes. I don't think that's what he's doing at all.
Yeah.
No. I do think he is to a certain, I mean, that's, if you've made billions of dollars, you're probably meticulous in certain aspects of how you make your money, right? I don't think he's doing that. I do think he is giving him autonomy, but I am curious to see how long the leash is, right? Because we're talking about three dudes that were synonymous with the Mets, and candidly, two of those three probably should have been synonymous with the Mets for their entirety of their careers. We can argue that one way or the other, because when you think the Mets, I mean, you think Pete Alonso, you think Edwin Diaz, and you do think Brandon Nimmo, right? And I understand the onus of Nimmo's contract financially probably wasn't the move, but in that same respect, you inherited that, and you just kind of have to navigate that. And to use a financial term, you have to service that debt somehow, right? And so you go in and you do the big splash. And to your point, I don't think last offseason was the pivotal offseason. I think that's kind of gonna come to, I don't even think it's this offseason. I think this offseason is kind of the catalyst to what could be the most important offseason for the Mets in a really long time. Because yeah. And then, we also have this lockout thing that's lingering, right? And so that's going to make it tricky to really do kind of anything when we get to that point. And so that's kind of why I wanted to get kind of the vibe check from kind of the not best coast. Sorry. Just to see kind of what, because again, you see, I hate to see when fan bases, and I'm not just saying this as a Dodgers fan, this is just as a sport fan, when a fan base just kind of you hear it all the time, the years of abuse crowd, right? Like you talk about the Raiders, talk about the Jets to bring it, kind of closer to your neighborhood. And everyone's just kind of like the meme of that Indian guy that's like looking around with his hands on his hips, like, what are we doing here? And that's what I see on the internet. Yeah. Just, and everyone loves drama. Don't get me wrong. Like that's one of the things about sports. Everyone loves a storyline. I just don't see what the deal is here. And so I wanted to ask you this too. They've hired a couple people for their coaching staff. Wanted to ask you kind of what your thoughts were on those, and because I genuinely do think that they do have some good core pieces there, but it also starts with them going kind of the way up to set the culture.
I mean, it's hard to tell because I haven't met. I mean, maybe I've texted one or two of these guys, but I haven't really met them in person. So I don't want to give like my opinion. I mean, like from what I'm told, that Kai Correa is a defensive whiz. That is what they brought him on for run prevention. And then then they either they promoted like or have hired four people who are part of player development, which is kind of like which is a good sign. I mean, these are people, especially with the Mets having a lot of young talent. These are guys that know how to kind of bring up that talent in a way that makes sense. That is exponentially more difficult in New York, where you are not insulated from the slings and arrows with just like, oh, he's just a kid. It's just like, well, your kid is hitting like a buck 25, so we don't care. So like that's one of those things. It's gonna be interesting. I don't necessarily know how long of a leash. We talk about David Stearns. I think David Stearns has a way longer leash than Carlos Mendoza has, and I don't necessarily know that that's fair. So that's going to be something because while Carlos Mendoza, I'm sure, had a hand in picking his coaching staff, I don't necessarily think he had a hand in firing his old coaching staff or the entirety of it. Because, these were all people that they actually meshed pretty well, even though Mendoza actually, did inherit a bunch of these guys. So this is going to be a situation where the first few months, a lot of this is going to fall on Carlos Mendoza. And then a lot of it's going to fall on, I know Justin Willard, he's very much like a Jeremy Hefner type, so there's a lot of similarities there in terms of guys who are like into analytics, so that might work out well. And then, you got Jeff Albert, who's the director of player development. All these guys, you have all these guys, and that is the one thing that I have heard is that the Mets have this like preponderance of coaches, and sometimes there might be too many voices. So it will be interesting to see how they streamline all of this as well.
I think it's interesting too because to go back to what I mentioned to you about, I think at this point they're probably going to have to make some trades. It's not like they don't have the assets. They absolutely do. They have, if I'm not mistaken, they have 4 or 5 dudes in the top 100 for prospects. And I know one of them's a shortstop, one of them's a catcher. This may shock you. I don't know a whole lot about the men's farm system. But I do know that they have a farm. I mean, it's the last few years, it's been in the top 15, right, as far as farm systems go. So it's not like they don't have the ability and the assets to kind of go out and do that. But what I am curious to kind of see is with those coaches, because to your point, I think Carlos Mendoza is kind of getting the short end of the stick here.
Yeah.
And it's no fault of his own as to kind of why the Mets are here, but at some point, someone does have to be the fall guy. And so I hope it's not Carlos Mendoza. But I did want to ask you about that. Is there a hot seat there in New York, kind of even before we start, after post winter meetings going into the 26th season? Or is that kind of just someone kind of just trying to make it a hot seat?
I mean, to quote Carlos Mendoza, with the very limited Spanish I knew, he was talking to a Spanish language reporter. He was like, "It's Major League Baseball. The seat is always hot." He said in Spanish. I'm like, "Yep." I do think there is. I think whenever you're in a situation where your entire coaching staff gets gutted, and you're the last one out, it's a very Godfather like situation. Like, well, there's the horse's head. So yeah, I do think, and again, this is a contract year for him. So like it would be very, very simple to part ways. And I just don't see while there were certainly times last season where Carlos Mendoza made head scratching decisions. You also have to judge those decisions in the context in which they were made. Most of those being, hey, we have no one with a functioning arm left in the bullpen. And how are you supposed to do bullpen management when you don't have pitchers who can pitch? When you're shuttling guys back and forth from AAA Syracuse, when your guys can't go 4 or 5 innings, when suddenly defense isn't there. Now, granted, there were times where absolutely it felt like there was a lack of communication, where it felt like maybe people weren't pulling in the same direction, where, everyone talks about clubhouse vibes. You can't really control that because when you start sucking, suddenly the vibes start sucking too. So that's not necessarily his fault, but regardless, the buck stops with him. and he knows that. So if I'm Carlos Mendoza, yeah, absolutely, I feel the heat. I felt the heat the minute they said, "Hey, your entire coaching staff is out." You feel the heat when he said that he was like surprised when he got the phone call from David Stearns about the Brandon Nimmo trade. The first thought in my mind is like, how late in the process were you told that this was happening? That's the first question I'm asking because it seemed like it was pretty late. If you're telling me that you were surprised, so I mean that tells you what you kind of need to know.
Yeah, it's just interesting because you hear about how Gary Cohen, himself, his own words, right, is we're going to turn this around, we're going to do all these things the right way, all that, and to me that doesn't strike me as the right way, right? Like in my opinion, you got to let your manager kind of like you're going to tell me Dave Roberts doesn't know what the plan is, like that. You're going to tell me Tori Lovello doesn't know what the plan is, right? Like these are upper echelon managers that we're talking here that obviously if they're there for the long haul, you want them to kind of know the deal. And so, yeah, it's just unfortunate to see the Mets kind of, I don't want to say they're in a bad way. I think right now what's happening has the optics of the bad way, but it just sucks for a Met fan because I actually do enjoy Met fan. I like some of my favorite fans in all of baseball, Red Sox fan, Met fan, because they're kind of the blue collar underdog folks, right? That love that this is their team. This is what we support. Kind of like another New York team, the Buffalo Bills, like good or bad, they're going to ride with them, right? I don't know if the same
Right.
can be said about the Mets. That's the one caveat now. It's like I don't know if they're going to ride with them through the bad at this point. And so I wanted to ask you that general vibes from the fan base, aside from the persona non grata stuff we talked about. Is it all kind of it's going to get better? Is it doom and gloom, or is it a mixed bag? And kind of what do you see kind of happening from here?
Um, Man, like if you go by Reddit or social media, everything is doom and gloom. I went to the Queen's baseball convention. I was speaking there as part of a panel. So that's one of those things where you get to interact with fans one on one. And I think there was like some slight, in person people are less fatalistic than they tend to be online. And I think there was some slight, well, like let's hold on and see what happens, which I think is a very mature, evolved way of approaching your baseball fandom. That being said, like hey, like we talk about the leash being short for like these front office. The leash is short for fans too. I don't think they're going anywhere because they all have Stockholm syndrome, but I do think that they're like disappointed. And I mean, like the sense there's like a little bit of heartbreak, but because this fandom and having been like surrounded by it for a while now, they are inured a little bit to disappointment. Um, they're kind of like taking an approach of well, this happened and it's terrible, but I'm used to it. So I don't know what that says. But yeah, no, they'll stick around, but it's not a fun time in Flushing right now. Like nobody, like people, whose jersey are you buying? After you have your Soto and your Lindor, whose jersey are you buying? It's really hard to like find someone to really kind of hold on to.
Yeah, I think it just sucks, man. Like for fan, like seeing just kind of the fan base, just go through it. Especially because let's not forget Edwin Diaz signs with the Dodgers. 24 hours later, Pete Alonso signs with the Baltimore Orioles. Ouch! Like that's tough, right? And so it's one of those where that window of and then this is several days removed from the Brandon Nimmo trade, so fan had to digest that a little bit. They thought they got done digesting it. Psych. Then Edwin Diaz signs with the Dodgers, Pete Alonso with the Orioles, and that's a tough stretch, a really tough stretch.
And don't like discount the fact that the Braves are loading up in a really
Yeah.
significant way. The back end of that bullpen is going to be insane. They also have the Mets' old pitching coach and their old first base coach. Suddenly, the Braves, who are like a nothing factor, become a very big problem. The Phillies re-signed Kyle Schwarber. Like the NL East is not getting easier, and the Mets right now. And again, I say this knowing very much that this is early in the offseason and things are going to change exponentially. But right now, the Mets are the team that got worse while everyone around them got better.
No, and it's interesting too that Edwin Diaz had a 5-year offer from the Braves, and he turned that down to still sign with the Dodgers. Which, in my opinion, he took two things into account: they appreciate him and the family part. But well, the third thing really is the ring. Like the potential of trying to win a ring is I think that's really all Edwin Diaz kind of has left, if you will, that he really kind of needs to check the boxes on is getting a ring. And he's already, in his position, upper echelon guy, all that stuff. Really, the ring to me, the ring thing is appealing. And listen, the Braves are also a very well run organization. They've been kind of I don't want to say in the dumps, but they've had a couple off years, and some of it's not their fault because of injuries, so on and so forth. But that's still a very well run team, and that's a team you don't want to be given assets to, because if you give them the right assets, that's a Ferrari.
Yeah. No, the Braves are going to be a problem. And back to Edwin Diaz, any fan who says like he was just chasing a paycheck, which again, by all means, please go chase a paycheck.
Yeah.
I don't think that was not the case there. He's proven twice he was not chasing. Yes, he wanted money, but he wasn't he was not chasing a paycheck. He was chasing a situation for his family and for himself.
So before I set you loose, I want to ask you, what do you think happens between now and kind of spring training? Like, who do you think is being targeted as the marquee signing, and who kind of comes in to fill those two positions that, Marcus Semien, I get it, but he's not Brandon Nimmo.
Right. I do think they do a heavy push on Bellinger. I think that makes sense. I think Kyle Tucker's going to be a little bit harder. I don't necessarily know that he wants to move from right field, but then again, with the right amount of money, like a lot of things can happen there. And then they probably make a swing for in the trade market. I think, like, I don't know if any of the pitchers there are necessarily going to be somebody who's left, like Zach Gallen. I don't know that those are really good guys for them. Probably like a Nick Pivetta. You hear them talking to the Padres a good bit. They are not getting Fernando Tatis Jr., I don't believe. So you can put those to rest. Like Freddie Peralta has been thrown out, a Joe Ryan, and now that's going to come at a cost. So, do you give up Jonah Tong? Because everyone is interested in Jonah Tong right now, and rightfully so. I do think Nolan McLean is safe, but beyond that, and I do think Carson Benj is safe. And I think it would be open season on any one of their other higher prospects.
Absolute last question, because you were at the winter meetings, so you kind of had a sense for the vibes. By the way, it was warmer there for you, and I also did see that you had yourself a great time at Disney World. So good for you because I know how hard you work. I know how hard you work. But hey, one day R&R is R&R. It doesn't matter what it is. A day is a day. Have no shame in posting those pictures, by the way, with your rookie friends. Do you think there is any smoke with Tarek Skubal being moved, or is it a lot of kicking tires to kind of see what the value for Tarek Skubal would be?
I think it's more the latter. I think it's more. Would the Tigers move him if you gave them your entire farm system and, like, I don't know, a yacht? Probably. I do think it's a little bit more of a kicking the tire situation. The Tigers can still do something. And if they're not doing something, they can flip them at the trade deadline. Sure, you're not going to get as much because it's for a shorter period of time, but if you're not giving them something that they really, really want, what is the point of moving Skubal? Like, they have all the leverage, especially with, like, the free agent, like, starting pitching class. I mean, like, if I'm them, I wait unless it's like an offer I absolutely can't refuse. And if it's an offer the Tigers absolutely can't refuse, you're probably overpaying for 1 year of a pitcher, unless you already have something in place where you can re-sign him.
No, I agree with all that 100%. I mean, if they were going to trade him, I think it would have happened already, just in part because that's a deal that's going to take some time, but also, that's the best starting pitcher that isn't Yoshinobu Yamamoto, that isn't like a handful of guys, right? I will say though, I think you're right that I think if you are going to move on from them, do it at the deadline because they absolutely still are in contention, and plus there's like 3 teams that can really make that deal happen. And I think, I don't know if the Mets are one of those teams. I think they could be, but I don't know if the Mets would want to give up their entire farm, all those 4 or 5 prospects I just mentioned, for one dude. But if you go and get that dude, that kind of gets David Stearns back in the good graces of the fans.
It does, but it also doesn't. Because I was talking to somebody about this like the other day, and they were like, okay, so, to the casual, like we know Tariq Skubal just fine because we work in baseball. To the casual baseball fan, how many people know Tariq Skubal really?
It's a great
And
point.
surprisingly, not that many. So, and also David Stearns doesn't work from the vantage point of PR. So if you're giving up a Nolan McLean, which, man, this kid, I understand that you can't tell early on, really, because anything can happen. Pitchers get hurt all the time. This kid is electric. So if you're giving up a Nolan McLean for 1 year of Tariq Skubal, you better be winning a World Series.
No, and even then, right? Like for the Dodgers, do the Dodgers need Skubal? No, they really don't. Like, and even then, if we learned anything last year, there is no guarantees, right? The Dodgers had, one of the most expensive bullpens in all of baseball, and you didn't even see Tanner Scott or Kirby Yates in the World Series, right?
Right.
So it's one of those where there's no guarantees of anything. And so I mean, if the move is there, you obviously have to seriously look at it. But, in some respects too, that's an overpay, right? And so it doesn't really make sense for some folks. For the Dodgers, it's like, hey, we're going to load up anyway, whatever. But when you look at kind of like the top five, the Twins aren't going to trade for Derek Skubal. Like that's not happening. The Brewers are an interesting one. I mean, they gave Baby Yelly all that, or Christian Yelich all that money. So they absolutely have an appetite for a deal. The Seattle Mariners, I think, are a very interesting kind of player in there with what. Yeah, I do too.
That'd be fun.
I felt so bad for Seattle Mariner fan when they didn't make it to the World Series, when they didn't advance, when they did all that stuff, right? And like you said, casual baseball fan may not necessarily know who Tarek Skubal is, but if you go and get that guy and you put him in a market like Seattle, they're gonna know who that dude is.
Yeah, and he should be known.
Yes.
Like, that's it.
And then to round out the top five, the Cleveland Guardians. The Guardians aren't going to trade for Derek Skubal. They're in the same division, but also the Guardians aren't going to pay that dude anything. That's why Lindor is a Met.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that's really kind of the teams that make the most sense to really make a deal outside of the Met. I don't think the Yankees would even trade for him either. And so I think you make a very good argument for folks that are like, no, they need to trade for him now and all this. Like, no, because it's still a slow play because that dude's gonna get probably $400 million.
Yeah, I think it's going to be $400 million. Dude, just wait for the trade deadline. There's going to be someone, if the Tigers are out of it, that's when you overpay. When you
Yes.
see the playoffs in your sights and you're like, we are one piece away, that's when you do it.
No, 100% right. Well, I wanted to get a temperature check from Flushing/Queens, and seems like the vibes have deteriorated. So I'm glad that this holiday season, we at least now know what's kind of going on out that way of the world.
Absolutely. Yes, everything's bleak here.
Laura, where can the people find anything that you do regarding with your beat, which is the Mets?
So you can find my writing at newsday.com/Mets. You can catch me on Twitter or X at Albanese Laura. And I have a podcast, which is mostly just like nonsense and sports and pop culture, called First Time Listener, a Long Time Caller.
They're all great follows, all great listens. We here at Baseball Isn't Boring are huge fans of Laura and her work. So please go follow her and support the thing. Even if you're not a Mets fan, she's a great follow because she'll throw random things out there about food, which we need to catch up on the food situation because I'm going to tell you something real quick before we end this. I was pretty bummed out that there's a Benihana at Yankee Stadium. I have a grievance with that. There should not be a Benihana at a baseball stadium. Like that's no.
There's not even a flaming volcano. It's just like Panda Express Benihana.
Yeah. But for me, it's like if you're going to have a Benihana, have it be a Benihana. But that grievance, I have such a grievance with that. I'm bummed about it. But we'll save that conversation for another time. But Laura Albanese, as always, thank you for joining us. This is West Coast Bias on Baseball Isn't Boring. Please follow all the socials if you're not, and we will catch you on the next one.